Hey everyone, it's Rick, and wanted to thank you again for joining me on another Inwyt Walkabout. It's a snowy day in the neighborhood. Give you a little view of the road as we get on our way here. Not horribly snowing, but definite signs that winter is here. I wanted to talk a little bit today in continuity to last week with our look at conflict and the role that division plays, and give you another example of division, and also to add maybe another element to division and what contributes to it, and that is point of view. So let me share a story with you again of my childhood. Back in fourth grade, I was in elementary school, and there were opportunities to play instruments for the first time, to get lessons in school. And my mom thought that that would be a great idea for me, and said, what instrument do you want to play? Because you should play an instrument. And I said, I want to play the drums. And my mom basically, I think, was concerned about, this was late 60s, early 70s, the counterculture and, the bands that were out, and, probably had some kind of concern that I somehow was going to get influenced by that and, deviate in a direction she didn't want to see me go. And she said, let's not play the drums. Why don't you play the flute? And, that was a significant deviation from my interest, but, I didn't have a whole lot of choice with her sort of being in charge. And so, I sort of, I guess, begrudgingly, half-heartedly said, okay, I'll play the flute. And, I started taking lessons in school, and, there's always been a part of me that just tries to do things the best that I can. And, I started to take it on, I'll say, sort of seriously, to at least try to play some pieces, some music. And, it always was a task that always seemed to get in the way of other things that I wanted to do. I was much more interested in sports and, basically being with my friends, and lessons and practice of an instrument were just, not at the top of my list, particularly when it was the flute. So fast forward to ninth grade, where I'm now playing more organized sports and still playing the flute. And at that time in ninth grade, sort of the first year of high school, there was orchestra. And so I joined the orchestra as a class, and all of a sudden found myself, playing interesting music, but also being in a new competitive environment. Orchestras or bands are actually very hierarchical, if you haven't noticed, where, within sections of instruments, there's a hierarchy of, the lead player, and all the way down to, the lower capable musicians. And, I always kind of found myself in the middle. I really was not competitive enough to be at the top, and I really wasn't interested. And part of that whole process of hierarchy maintenance and progression was that periodically, the band director would open up sections to, what were called challenges. And somebody who was beneath you, or if you wanted to try to move up, could challenge a musician or instrument player above you, and they would give you a piece to play, and basically you would perform it solo, and whichever one of you performed it better, either retained or advanced to the person's position who lost. And I really did not like that process at all, because it was, again, one of those elements that I had really no interest in, and it was also for me just sort of a risk of exposure, if you will, of the lack of interest that I had, and really not sort of blending into the crowd, but having to kind of show my lack of talent, if you will, openly for everybody to see. And so I would generally, when I was challenged, I never challenged, but when I was challenged, I would generally just acquiesce the position to whoever challenged me and said, just take it. And, there never was tremendous movement, so I was always kind of in the middle, but, it just was one of those less pleasant parts of being in the band. So what's the point of that story relative to what we were talking about last week and, to conflict in general? I think it's pretty clear that this is a good example, again, of a bunch of different divisions that occurred, from my mom making decisions of one instrument versus another, sort of the challenges that I described in the band itself. And, I think the other piece that I wanted to point out for you all to consider is the role of point of view of values and how values really influence conflict and division, and that we put a lot of subjectivity into how we view things, and that really all conflict is subjective. There's always an interpretive component of what you think is going on to what you think should be going on or what you think you should be doing, which creates this division, again, this barrier and spot where it doesn't feel comfortable. Something is not right. And so, it plays out very subtly and very obviously in areas when you actually start to look across the board, from values that are either imposed to us or by just societal expectations, authority figures, a parent or a leader, having a particular point of view that may or may not align with you. If it doesn't, again, you get into a divisive situation where you have one point of view versus your point of view. And they keep compounding each other, right? So I didn't really want to play the flute, I wanted to play the drums. And now I'm in band, and I have to now compete for a position in the band to play the instrument that I don't really want to play. And I have other things that I want to be doing. And on top of that, think about this, how many football players do you know who play the flute, right? So in high school, there's a lot of sensitivities around showing up in a particular way. And, again, not something that's overtly stated necessarily, but certainly a consideration that all of a sudden blends into this whole morass as well. And all of a sudden you're just bombarded with, a situation where you're going, what is going on here? And why is this so complicated? And fundamentally, you can just step back and go, well, we're all kind of looking at things through our lens, our perspective, the values that we have, the rules that we have, and we're applying those to what we think is going on. And it may or may not align within our own set of values. I want to play football, I don't want to play the flute. That's an internal conflict. And then externally, you see how it shows up the way I described in, again, instruments and, visibility around, being a flute player and a football player. It wasn't something that I was just advertising across the board because, again, there were just sort of these subjective interpretations that at least I had created that were somewhat established, at that age group, that, again, kind of created this awkward situation. So think about this, again, I'm giving you some specific examples, but use these examples to look at your own daily lives and, see how division and how subjective interpretation that, again, it's not right or wrong, it's just there, start to really influence what you do, how you think, and how, again, you get into situations that just feel uncomfortable. You know, they can be subtle and they can be extreme. And, you know, a lot of it is, when you think about it, is you know, you can kind of look at it and go, is this really necessary? Like, why are we doing this? And again, try to look at it from the perspective of understanding, and, you know, sort of just based on that, maybe seeing some new direction that you might be able to consider. So that's it for today. We've talked about division, we've talked about subjectivity, you know, points of view as being influences, and we'll continue to explore the next time with another component. So I'll leave you one more time with a view of snowfall in the neighborhood. Again, it's always beautifully quiet. This is Rick with Inwyt Walkabout. Hope you all have a great week, and I will see you next time. Take care.